Dr. Sano, thank you very much. I wanted to open this morning and this evening and late night for some of you by making the confession that I had neither touched nor seen the actual source that brings us together today, Jugaku Bunsho's Kamisuki Mura Tabiniki, his travel diary. But I had not seen the video that we were just shown, and I can't say now that I haven't seen a copy of the book that has brought us together. So thank you very much for that really a nice substitution. It would be wonderful to be there for the real thing, and perhaps you can make that a permanent exhibition at the museum. I also want to confess to you that Ibe Kyoko's essay on Gampi in the Legacy Press's recent volume, Papermaker's Tears, of which Kathleen Baker was the publisher, has seeped into me while preparing for the symposium. I have imagined myself as one of Ibe's recycled washi creations, remade by paper words and works that have moved me. You should know, however, that I'm not a paper specialist in the matter of my fellow speakers. For me, paper is a filter to share 21st century notes from the ground, this time being from Vietnam, Laos, Bhutan, and Nepal, and more specifically, or maybe I should say overall, instead, as an ongoing search for new ways to connect art and life. Still, at the outset, I want to establish that each of these counts is very much grounded in my experiences in Japan. My interest in paper and paper making has grown out of my daily life, my training in literature and art, including self-study and craft, and my belief in hands-on anthropology and person-to-person sociology. Across my childhood, an uncle shared his experience in the North American paper industry and his love of the product with me. Eye to hand, we inspected samples of paper creations and print matter. They shared no links with Asia, apart from their appeal to the beauty and diversity of paper's materiality. Japan is a focus manifested later through a last-minute option to take a course on tea ceremony at my university, a chance opportunity to work in Gifu Prefecture thereafter, and my eventual study of Japanese literature. The more literature I was exposed to, however, the more I distanced myself from its words. My dissertation on the late Meiji literary arts journal Myojo is celebrated for Yosano Akiko's poetry, but Myojo's pages also featured woodcuts and cultural criticism by the artist intellectuals Yamamoto Kanae, Fujishima Takeji, and Ishii Hakute. Image and text in Myojo led me to the network of making behind such cultural production: knives and brushes, inks and pigments, wood and blocks, and naturally paper too. When this journey led to artisans and artists themselves, I discovered I had much to learn in their sociocultural milieu, well beyond technique. By observing their humility, diligence, precision, and reliance on the communal work of others, I learned about the depths of their art and craft. In another way of thinking, paper, like prints, also serves as a conduit to become acquainted with the many individuals who touch a single sheet of paper, from grower or gatherer of the raw materials to global buyers, artisans, artists, givers, and receivers. And of course, Jugaku and Shizu were right there in the middle of all of that, working with the makers. Today, I hope to create a composite picture, one composite picture of paper that mirrors the richness of these worlds. Prior to Ibe Kyoko's publication on Gampi, I collaborated with her on other projects, thanks to my tea ceremony professor, who paired us together. As part of Ibe and theater director Elise Theron's stunning production, Washi Tales, I translated Mizukami Tsutomu's novella, Najiogawa, or Najio River. As a side note, I've yet to publish the translation, but it's noteworthy, I think, in the aftermath of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, that Mizukami wrote Najiogawa in the post-1964 Olympic era of cultural pride and renaissance for Japanese craft. Ibe later introduced me to living national treasure, Tanino Takenobu, who made paper practically in my backyard of Nishinomiya. I watched Mr. Tanino work mud into a vat of gampi fibers to produce Najio's well-known Doro Maniai, just as Mizukami documented in Najiogawa. And I'm not sure how many of you perhaps have seen the Doro, the mud, the clay, the dirt, the soil that is mixed into Tanino's, the style of paper that he has made. But I have this raw photograph here that shows you some old currency. It was especially prized to be used for currency because these shades of color could not be matched very easily. Traditional woodblock printers and contemporary print and paper artists in Kyoto pointed me toward Fukui Prefecture to meet their paper makers. My family made a pilgrimage to Iwano Ichibe IX's workshop in Echizen, along with environmentalist friends. Ichibe and his wife earnestly engaged my children in their work, while they appealed to our companions. Ichibe articulated how fine fluctuations in water quality and temperature impact finished sheets, how kozo fibers he uses today tend to be shorter than the past because a majority of his raw material originates in Thailand, where the mulberry trees mature differently. Like others of us here, I suspect, I hold fast to a box of Hosho card Ichibe presented to me. As a practical and ideal as his gift is for business cards, I have not used them yet. I returned with my family for Echizen's annual Washi Festival. This time, paper-making families were occupied with festivities, so meaning flowed from other mediums. Scenes from Najiogawa, which originates in Echizen, came to life. I witnessed Okamoto Otaki Shrine in the mysterious grandeur that Mizukami describes. Its undulating roof weathered against the verdure of the mountain behind it. I imagine the procession up the mountain to present a sheet of Hosho to the paper goddess. I jolted with every swing of the portable shrines. The combination of these human rituals, no matter how remote they are today from ancient tradition, transmitted the energy and potential and a kind of spirituality that is caught up in this festival that has the play on spirit, kami, and paper, kami, from the paper makers' new sheets to those who partook of the festival. When my family traveled to Hanoi to visit friends a year later, paper and print were on my mind too. Northeast of Hanoi lies Dongho village on the banks of the Red River. Dongho is the epicenter of folk prints, on distinctive Vietnamese paper known as do. While Chinese New Year's prints, known as Nian Hua, of a parallel tradition, stand out for their storied content, fine lines, and a full color palette against natural paper. These Vietnamese Tet prints are distinctive for their crisp, sturdy sheets. Beyond customary white and brown dough, fresh forest leaves color sheets in mustard, orange, and spring green. Another layer of dough's appeal are the conspicuous streaks artisans apply to the sheets with a fine needle brush before others print paint and print atop the image. The sizing is typically of an oyster shell base and leaves a more opulent luster, or just a much heavier luster, I guess you would say, in the background than mica dusting on the finished surfaces of ukiyo-e or mokohanga in general. What I remember most, because it was so palpable, was the warmth and hospitality of the extended family of paper and printmakers in the enclave we visited. They indulged my children while I simultaneously pestered the English speakers and artisans preparing the paper with my questions. The family members trusted the children, and we, the parents, to explore without tampering and disturbing their work, or the prints themselves. While this may seem like a normative treatment of visitors, I mention this because it's not necessarily universal, neither across cultures nor in many workplaces today. With our proximity to Laos, my family decided to take a short trip to Luang Prabang. Up the Mekong and over to the Nam Can River lies the village of Ban Chang Kong. Workshops there make sa paper from rapid growth, no harvest mulberry bark that sheds from the trees. Our visit being impromptu, and again in the company of children, neither shared language nor childcare allowed for deep study. This time I had to rely on the visible manifestations of the paper makers and the work of their hands. For years, I had photographed hands in the process of making, and more, I should say, in the poses of making, because I admire the lines of the hands, the differences in one pair of hands to the next. But it was here that I began to focus on the spirit and knowingness that hands in motion reveal, especially women's hands, who heretofore had been rare for me to observe. The Lao villagers transformed their paper into objects that showcased how a basic craft diversifies across contexts. In other words, they communicated their values through what they created with the paper, no different, of course, from Japan or elsewhere. While paper molding and embossing is common across paper worlds, I had never seen it in Buddha's likeness, more resonant of stone rubbings gone 3D, or even a statue of the Buddha itself. Bodhi leaves floating on the paper pulp informed me of the surrounding native trees. Beyond their graceful design, the Buddhist iconography between both leaf and tree suggested the leaves were integrated not for foreign tourists alone. The bright paper lanterns dazzled. Their metalwork frames implied, moreover, handcraft techniques beyond the paper shop. My partner, who's always prepared with cash but rarely spends, discovered a stack of elephant dung and purchased a sheet for its technical resourcefulness. These artisans had created a portfolio of new art and life for us to experience. And with paper scrap comes pocket notebooks that served as simple but practical gifts for my children and others. These tokens, in turn, have cultivated their appreciation of handmade paper, from the sensory to the aesthetic to material awareness, and in discerning different types of paper suited to different purposes. After I migrated to China from Japan, I discovered a plethora of paper in Beijing's time-honored art street, Liulichang. I met artist and craft specialist Hashizume Yoshiko, who introduced me to various print and paper circles, examined Tibetan Buddhist sutras on a long, narrow sheets printed at painstaking speed, and tracked Jiama amulets to their ethnic bi-minority makers in southern China, in Yunnan province. These are simple prints on ephemeral tissue, affixed on indigo vats, livestock stalls, over doors, on living room walls, above kitchen trash bins, within by homes. The paper world opened to an interior cultural life I never would have known. I had to reflect, how was it that I first came to know paper of Nepal, which is where I most recently lived? I should have anticipated, even expected, that paper was made in Nepal when family plans took me there. Both the borders, Nepal itself, and of course the borders of Tibet and India, in the border areas at least, you have the Buddhist tradition of chanting sutras from once handmade sheets. My first dip into Nepali paper began, however, with the photographs from artist and friend Tamara Bedford, who sent a digital album of the Peacock paper shop in Bhaktapur, one of the Kathmandu Valley's 3 ancient kingdoms. That also, incidentally, was the city that you may have seen on the news that was destroyed quite heavily during the earthquake there in 2015. Tamara's glimpses from windows and of crevices, corridors, and staircases within the shop reflected relentless change. Architectural fragments spoke not only of the elements of time and ingenuity, but, as I mentioned, the earthquake. The shop resembled a museum freezing in time. Yet its spaces are abundant with paper stacks known as lokta, rustic paper bearing robust fibers. And when it's soaked in vermilion, eggplant, midnight blue dyes, then dried, lokta exudes a kind of plushness. The shop's industrial presses, imported from India and blessed, as you can see on the left there in the red, with spiritual icons to bless, like the prints actually in Yunnan, were adapted for numerous lokta techniques, including flattening. On the right, you can see they slide sheet at a time into this press to flatten the rough leaves into smooth, almost shiny or polished sheets when they're done. While I scrolled through these images from my Washington, D.C. bed one morning, Peacock impressed me for its marriage of paper and print. Its coupling fostered a dynamism in this old shop. Women's hands turned lokta pieces into hundreds of 2 and 3D objects, many artfully printed. Recently, Tamara shared a video she created of a pair of women in this studio above the shop, which I would have loved. I didn't realize I could share, but I have the room here just to put you in the mood. And in this video, you see this manual rhythm of sheet print, and it's not the rapidity that you get with that you would get historically with the Tibetan sutras. It consummated a paper print union, I would say, and this union also between these women that remains, in my mind, intimate, steadfast, hopeful. Such experiences inspired Tamara in her recent work when COVID-19 halted her regular trips to Nepal. And in these, you can't see the texture on her works there, but in both cases, she has worked pieces of lokta and other elements of her relationship to the artistic sides of Nepal into her work. Once I arrived in Nepal myself, I became preoccupied with sightings of Nag, or snake posters as they're known. They're Hindu festival talismans that are adhered to doors and walls with dung, cow dung normally, dubo grass, and a rupee coin. I theorized that these snakes had once been hand printed, and I was hungry to learn more. The images so entranced me that I forgot the paper print union, and it never occurred to me to consider the print's vehicle. Did they use lokta, and what kind served their purpose? Bhutan intervened. Tamara organized a visit to Junshi Handmade paper factory in Thimphu. The Bhutanese government established the site, and in 1986 invited a Sekishu Banshi papermaker from Shimane Prefecture to train new hands. and this is an exchange that still continues today, which is impressive when in these kinds of cultural exchanges, that it can go on that long. While Bhutan and Nepal share deep connections, the Junshi and Peacock shop operations represent different evolutions of printmaking. Junshi runs a compact, streamlined process for Japanese-style papers and largely keeps to its form in fine sheets for global export. The Bhutanese paper varieties are yet carriers of local effect, such as cord and leaves of hemp, are patterned with unique watermarks, embossing, and windows of varying thickness to allow light in or out. Like my treasuring Ichibe's Hosho, Tamara observed, Junshi paper is like a really nice bottle of wine. You don't know why you're saving it, but it's precious. Once back in Kathmandu, Lokta emerged in daily life from the hills around Kathmandu Valley to Himalayan villages in the northeastern Annapurnas and the southwestern Chitwan district. And you would just be hiking along and you would see a sign or the side of a building that would tell you, here is a handcraft factory, here is another paper handicraft factory. I witnessed hands of all kinds, braiding lokta into rope incense, stringing lokta mobiles and prayer flags, and stitching books into every possibility and proportion. Like Japan, the Nepali government too requires official documents to be printed on indigenous lokta paper. Lokta melded with my own life during a craft heritage seminar that I ran at a Himalayan school. This school is situated near the heart of the sacred Bodha Stupa, where handcraft thrives to serve daily life and myriad ritual practices. A shy, soft-spoken student named Tsering Choden asserted that she wanted to learn more about Lokta in the neighborhood. Neither of us knew of nearby Lokta contacts, but a mention to a Canadian Finnish friend, to a Sherpa friend, produced the phone number for Nima Sherpa of Tibetan Handicrafts and Paper. Along with 7 classmates, an older graduate of the school who'd launched what he called after-school project to expose Himalayan youth to viable employment, and myself, Tsering led us on the 30-minute vertical hike from the school to tour the Lokta workshop. Nima was visibly excited when the students arrived. I've tried to get this going through the local schools, he exclaimed, but no one is interested. He offered the students a chance to try their hands at rocking the screen to form a sheet, touching and smelling the pulp, and peeling the stiff sheets off the screens, propped at an angle to attract the sun. The students' joy and intrigue was evident. Nima guided us from room to room of his serpentine setup, where we chatted with women and men finishing items in communal groups and observed the arduous yet artful work of dyeing sheets, like hand washing delicate garments in a bucket and laying them out in the sun to dry. Students lingered at a hilltop studio where an artisan specializes in making lamp black paper that monasteries order for special sutra copying in gilt ink, much like the indigo dyed jigami that Ibe discusses in her Gambi essay. The teenagers lit up too when they viewed a sample book of papers patterned with familiar Tibetan motifs and local plants. Tsering Choden herself wore the biggest smile of all as we departed the workshop. Before the coronavirus spread into our lives, I met one of Nepal's first contemporary print artists, Ragini Upadhyay Grela, an expatriate of Nepal's unceasing diaspora. Ragini has since settled back in a rustic Nepali home on the outskirts of Kathmandu and discovered a technique enabling her to print etchings on lokta after her desire to preserve and appreciate native tradition. And again, you can see more visibly here the lokta that she's pieced in these different works. But the challenge, because of this roughness and a much more just the rougher texture of the lokta style paper, it never served to hold the ink in the same way and in the delicate way that you can on other types of paper for etchings. But she was determined to make this happen. Seeking to push the boundaries of paper and print available in Nepal, Kabiraj Lama, a younger artist trained in printmaking at Meisei University in Tokyo. He prefers washi for its weight, texture, and consistency, but due to washi's restrictive cost and access, he's experimenting with lokta. Recently, he pulled prints from sutra woodblocks stored in a monastery a few minutes up from his home. He'd been living there all his life and discovered that this local monastery had a whole store house of blocks of sutras. And he went there to do a demonstration, both for his artistic expression as well and his own reevaluation of Himalayan paper and printmaking. The monks marveled at his knowledge. Whereas Kabiraj circled back to his own between the 3/11 Tohoku earthquake and 2015 Nepal earthquakes, artist Takehama Hiroko had ventured to South Asia after the 1995 Kobe earthquake. She studied Tagore's philosophy at West Bengal Visva-Bharati University while residing in a rural village. This dual experience led her to contemplate the intersection of art and life too, and as I interpret her subsequent work, to create inspiration through nature. She selected lokta as her medium. Serendipitously, I caught this exhibition at Kobe's Gallery Shimada in 2019. I was drawn to Takahama's masses of color that, while bold and explosive in a certain way, were softened, I realized, by their underlying surface. The uneven but natural color, crimp, and texture of her vehicle turned out to be lokta. The coincidence that I traveled from Nepal with lokta in hand prompted me to speak with the artist. A few months later, Takahama and I met in Kathmandu's Bodh district to visit Nima's workshop. This time we hopped a taxi to reach the hillside site. Takahama, Nima, and the women dyers exchanged ideas while the artist inspected their vast offerings. Thereafter, Takahama and her NHK traveling companion and I agreed we would meet again in Kobe to dig deeper into our shared connection. And with that, my story closes for now. Not quite full circle, Japan to South Asia, but soon back to Japan. Thank you.